I don't think America has a policy on Gaza at this moment in time. I think Netanyahu believes that October 7th provided a golden opportunity.
Tony Blair may be recruited as some sort of governor of Gaza.
What if in Texas Ted Cruz loses when Americans realize that Ted Cruz is Israel first instead of America first?
I caught up with Sami Hamdi in Chicago as we analyse events in the Middle East. We spoke before the most recent imperial plan to take possession of Gaza and focus on the fallout from Israel's bombing campaign across the Muslim world. I ask, is the Muslim world finally waking up to the greater Israel project?
Qatar could withdraw its investments from the United States and say to Trump, I'm not giving you the $1.4 trillion and give me back my plane. I mean, the very definition of an Israeli citizen is somebody who lives on stolen land. Israel's aim has always been greater Israel. Netanyahu saying we will never recognize a Palestinian state. The Epstein files, it coincides with a sort of falling in line on the part of Donald Trump.
Sami Hamdi, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to The Thinking Muslim here in Chicago.
Wa alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I have to come to Chicago now to interview you, Sami. How's your stay in
Alhamdulillah,
America
very
been?
good. Chicago is one of those great cities, I think.
Yeah.
I think you were trying to remark earlier, I'll cause a bit of fitna. You were trying to say it's the best city that you visited in America so far.
It looks, at least it has that, the aesthetics looks pretty.
Just tell it to the New Yorkers, just a bit louder at the back, they didn't hear.
Oh, subhanAllah, yes, yeah. Well, look, Jazakallah khair, thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to really talk about the last few months, and in particular the last month since the attack on Doha, the Hamas attack, the attack of the Israelis on Hamas in Doha. And I want to focus in on whether that's really changed something. I spoke to Abdullah Al-Auda a few days ago. I've interviewed him. His interview will come out after yours. And he mentioned a really interesting phrase. He said, he feels that these last few weeks will possibly change the trajectory of the calculus of some of the Muslim rulers. Now, he wasn't being over optimistic, but I think he called it the Doha moment. That we potentially maybe we may be moving beyond those security arrangements that or calculations that many of the Muslim rulers have had for the last few decades, possibly. So I want to really talk about whether the Muslim world has turned over a new leaf, especially since these attacks on Doha, and have they realized that Israel does have a hegemonic, expansionist agenda when it comes to the Middle East, and have they changed their perceptions of the United States? Now, let's start really with the most recent news. Donald Trump has made some really strong statements in the last day about West Bank expansion, but that's really come after months of doing nothing really in relation to this genocide. Can you comment on whether there is still a coherent policy that the Americans have towards Gaza, and whether this recent announcement that potentially Tony Blair may be recruited as some sort of governor of Gaza falls within any form of well thought through, understanding of American foreign policy.
I think one of the things that is worth noting is that when Trump first won his second term and came to power, one of the first things he does is he calls for a ceasefire, forces the Israelis into a ceasefire that they don't want, which means Netanyahu ends up going to the White House to try to talk to Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump sends Adam Boehler to talk directly to Hamas to try to negotiate the release of some hostages. The Israelis get upset and end up leaking it in a bid to try to humiliate Trump in front of the other Republicans that are backed by AIPAC in order to try to suggest somewhat that Trump is violating the terms of the agreement between AIPAC and between a number of the members of Congress. Trump ends up moving Adam Boehler from the Gaza file to the Afghanistan file and the like. And then there's a very interesting phenomenon that takes place later. The Epstein files become something that's talked about across America, and it coincides with a sort of falling in line on the part of Donald Trump with that which the Israelis would like to see happen in Gaza. Having said that, I don't think that necessarily means that the Americans have surrendered all of their foreign policy to the Israelis with regards to Gaza. I think that the number of factors are in play. First of all, I think when you look at Marco Rubio, who is intent on trying to present some sort of presidential bid in the future, Secretary of State at the moment, Marco Rubio believes that most of the donations, most of the donors will come from Zionists. And therefore, I think that instead of being a Secretary of State for America, he's become a Secretary of State for Israel and bringing all of America's force on the Israelis, almost as if to say, if Adelson is going to back somebody in the next election, let her back me, let her not back Donald Trump or somebody else. So I think that a lot of Marco Rubio's statements that he's making and the like is with a view of a presidential election and the traditional approach of the Republicans, in that if you have Israel on board, you potentially can win the presidency later on. I think, however, that what's interesting about the Doha attacks that took place, you were mentioning about US foreign policy, is that the day before the Qatar attacks, Kushner and Witkoff are in Tel Aviv. And the talk is that Witkoff is trying to present some sort of new ceasefire plan and the like. Then suddenly the following day, we have the Qataris who are hit. I think it is plausible that the Israelis attacked Doha without informing Donald Trump about the attack, in a sort of lashing out, in the sense that the Americans who continue to talk about the prospect of a ceasefire, even if they're not pushing it with all of their power, Netanyahu believes that time is not essentially on his side, and therefore he tried to attack Doha in order to ruin and scupper any negotiations with relation to a ceasefire. Because the Doha attacks also coincided with another development, which is that the UAE had informed the Israelis that any annexation of the West Bank would result in a reversal of normalization of ties. Anwar Gargash and the UAE were asserting that the way we convinced the Muslim world that normalization was something to be accepted, this is the UAE arguing, is that we told them we were normalizing to rescue the West Bank. If you go after Gaza, UAE and Israel aims in Gaza are perfectly aligned. UAE and Israel want to see Hamas eliminated from Gaza. Saudi Arabia and Israel are perfectly aligned on Gaza. They want to see Hamas eliminated from Gaza, and they want to see a different authority in Gaza itself, and they want to see a disarmed Palestine. But the UAE believes that the West Bank is a very different issue because it puts them in a very awkward situation. The reason I think Trump made the statement that he is categorically against the annexation of the West Bank is because I think for the first time there is a joint lobbying effort on the part of the entire Muslim world, whether it's Erdogan, whether it's bin Zayed, whether it's bin Salman, whether it's the Qataris and beyond. When Trump sat with all of them at the United Nations, they were categorically stating, sincerely, albeit for very different interests, that Mr. President, this is genuinely a red line. Annexation of the West Bank is really bad, not for Palestine. It's really bad for us publicly. It's really bad for our relations with the Americans. And that's why I think that Donald Trump, in the same way that he told Netanyahu, go and burn Gaza, and then met King Abdullah the next day and said, my Riviera plan was just an idea, Donald Trump likewise spoke with Netanyahu and then seemed to approve this plan somewhat of Tony Blair going to this authority in Gaza and the like, then met with those Muslim leaders who told him it was a red line, and now he's coming out with a different statement saying annexation of the West Bank is completely different. There's not much coherence in Trump's policy insofar as what he wants from Gaza. There is a coherence that he doesn't have any idea what he wants from Gaza. There is a coherence in that Trump, unlike Biden had a very clear idea of what he wanted in Gaza. Whatever Israel wants, I do. Whatever Israel needs, I give. If they need a humanitarian pier to enable me to send Marines, I'll do a humanitarian pier. If they're struggling to ethnically cleanse northern Gaza, I'll do a humanitarian corridor to help facilitate the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And Harris's memoirs are coming out and saying that Biden, when he saw everybody was becoming pro-Palestinian in the base, said, but I'm a Zionist. With Donald Trump, however, it's who gives him the most ideal argument that brings America's best interest. And Trump doesn't know where that lies at this particular moment in time. And that's why I think that, to your question, does America have a policy on Gaza? I don't think America has a policy on Gaza at this moment in time. I don't think Trump has a policy on Gaza. I think that it's about who has the strongest lobby. And I think when it comes to Gaza, the strongest lobby is the Israeli, UAE, Saudi lobby. When it comes to the West Bank, I think the Israeli lobby is weakening.
Over the past months, as you know, the starvation, the famine in Gaza has reached its peak, leading to not only tens or over hundreds of people dying out of malnutrition. Today, we're preparing this massive quantity of baby milk in order to be distributed to children who need them the most, whether in hospitals, in marginalized sin camps. This is a source of life for hundreds and thousands of children in the Gaza Strip. This small bottle is actually life for those in need.
Right. Right. Okay. There's a few threads there. You talked about how Donald Trump fell into line during this period after the ceasefire, which fell apart, and of course then the bloodletting became even more intense. And you mentioned the Epstein files. Is there a connection between the Epstein files and Donald Trump falling into line?
I don't want to say that there is a direct connection. I want to say that when you look at a graph of the trajectory of Trump's policies with regards to Gaza, there is something very uncanny about the timing of the Epstein files and what Trump subsequently does with regards to Gaza and how the narrative of Gaza suddenly changes. From pushing for a ceasefire, from talking to Hamas, to suddenly giving a blank check to the Israelis in the same way that Biden did with regards to Gaza itself. I know some people have said that the bloodletting has been worse under Donald Trump and the like. Personally, I don't think you can compare Biden and Trump with regards to bloodletting, because in reality, they both destroyed homes, they both slaughtered, they both bombed people's legs off, they both are killing the Palestinian kids, they both are killing the Palestinian women. I think as far as both of them are concerned, it's almost exactly the same. That's my opinion on it.
But the people of Gaza are saying that it's become far more intense, okay, in recent weeks. I mean, maybe that's not a correlation, but they are saying, especially in the last few months, weeks, it's been far more intense.
But my interpretation of the intensity has less to do with Donald Trump and more to do with the Zionists becoming increasingly aware that they are not having it the way that they want with regards to influencing America and with regards to what they want to achieve in Gaza. I think the intensity has to do with the idea that when Israel is trying to keep Europe in line, UK is recognizing Palestine instead.
Right.
France is recognizing Palestine instead. Spain is recognizing Palestine instead. The flotillas now, Italy and Spain sent ships in order to go and rescue their flotillas. That despite attempts to ban boycotts of Israel within the US itself, the Congress, the bill did not pass and it did not go through. Despite attempts to go and put organizations that are anti-genocide on some sort of terrorist list, a court in Michigan rules that American Muslims for Palestine are a legitimate organization, have every right to freedom of expression. A court in Nevada says that on universities, it's perfectly legitimate to talk about the Palestinian issue. You have this non-profit killer bill in which the Israelis try to get the Americans to give unilateral power to their allies in America to remove the tax-exempt status from charities. Instead, we saw Christian churches go to Trump and say, we don't want to give this unilateral power to the Attorney General. You have no right to come and intervene in our tax-exempt status. I think the Zionists, when they're looking at Andrew Cuomo, who tried to preach that he was on the side of Israel and we need to stand with the Israelis, found that that policy made him lose against Mamdani, and Political reports 2 days ago that now Cuomo is no longer talking about the Israelis anymore because he feels it's a political liability. I think the Israelis are watching how the world is changing, where a Chinese diplomat is talking to an Israeli general who's trying to tell everybody about the, quote, legitimate cause of the Israelis committing genocide, and the Chinese diplomat says nobody believes your lies anymore. I think Netanyahu is noticing that when he goes and speaks at the United Nations, most of the room ends up leaving while he's talking. I think that for the Israelis, I don't think the intensity has to do with Donald Trump as much as it has to do with we're finding that the leash that is given to us to continue doing this is getting shorter. The leash is getting tighter. We're no longer in a position that we used to be. Netanyahu now is coming out saying that we need to establish a self-sufficient economy because the world, in his words, are listening to the Palestinians and to the Chinese and to the Qataris. And therefore, because of the boycotts, we need to now shift our economy into a self-sufficiency. I think that what we're seeing fundamentally is the intensity is not Donald Trump telling the Israelis go wild. It's the Israelis saying, oh my goodness, we're running out of time. We need to take Gaza. We need to bomb it into oblivion. And I think the Israelis are going rabid, which is why they attacked Qatar. In my opinion, there is a possibility. I don't know if it's certain or not. It's possible they didn't let Trump know. They are going that rabid. I think the Israelis are going rabid, and that's why we're seeing that intensity. It's not because they believe they're in the ascendancy, but rather they believe the world is changing too quickly, and we need to quickly make our gains before the world shuts in on us.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, most commentators have suggested that Donald Trump at least had some forewarning, or at least the American administration had some forewarning of those Qatar attacks. But you suggest otherwise. You may want to address that, but also you've said so far that the Americans do not have a coherent policy. Does Netanyahu have a coherent policy here?
On the point of Trump, it's not that I'm saying that Trump absolutely did not know.
Right.
It's that the Israelis are capable of acting outside what America allows them to do.
Right.
Israel historically has attacked even American ships. Israel has demonstrated that when it feels itself back to the wall, it's ready to burn the world, and it's ready even to go against its own ally, the Americans, and then spend money to lobby congressmen in order to try to keep the peace with the Americans and ensure there's some sort of alliance with the Israelis. It's not beyond the Israelis to do that. The second point is that Donald Trump his son is about to open numerous investment projects with the Qataris, who've just given him $1.4 trillion in investments alongside the Gulf states. Is it logical, and I don't have an answer for this, that Trump took $3.4 trillion only to tell the Israelis go and attack the Qataris? Is it plausible that the Qataris gave Trump all of this money and Trump would take that money and then say to the Israelis, go and attack Qatar? For Trump's personality, it's very unlikely that he would do so, given that he's somebody who needs that financial assistance, somebody who's celebrating those investments, and somebody who celebrates those ties with those particular Gulf states. I'm not saying that Trump cares about those Gulf states. I'm saying it is very plausible that the Israelis said, let's hit quickly and then we'll deal with the fallout later on. If we assume that Trump knew, what is the interest in Trump allowing the Hamas delegation to be hit by the Israelis when the only plausible media outcome would be that Trump is being dictated to by the Israelis and they want to ruin his ceasefire negotiations? That's not an image Trump wants to give out to the Americans or wants to give out to the Arab world or even beyond. Thirdly, American officials are aware what it means if Doha is attacked in such a way. They know that it would spark a movement in which people look for alternative security arrangements and the like. It's hard to imagine American officials gathering together with Donald Trump and saying, Mr. President, this is a very good idea. Let's let the Israelis hit Doha because we have some sort of vested interest in it. They would have calculated that it would have sweeping, possibly irreparable consequences with regards to what happens. In other words, it's not that I'm saying Trump didn't know. What I'm saying is, I don't think it's as clear-cut, given that it just doesn't make any sense. Like when you look at it either way and you balance the various different interests. I think with Netanyahu and the Israelis, there is a very coherent foreign policy. Yeah. The Israelis believe that no matter how much mess we make, America will always clean up. No matter how much we struggle, America will rebuild our Iron Dome. No matter how much money we lose, Americans will give us billions of dollars to look after us while homes that have been ravaged by Hurricane Katrina will remain destroyed because the priority will be Israel over those American citizens in Florida. That while Americans wrestle with healthcare bills and many families going bankrupt with healthcare bills, Israel believes that the American government's priority will be to give $14 billion in October 2023 to the Israelis over dealing with those healthcare crises. Israel believes that no matter how bad the homelessness crisis gets in Chicago or in Los Angeles and the like, the government of America is Israel first before it's America first. Israel believes that the amount of lobbying power that it has deployed in America, that $300 million that it spends on AIPAC every year, that Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying should now register as a foreign agent, Israel believes we can go wild and we can count on Marco Rubio and the Americans to lobby on our behalf to clean up that mess. And that's what I mean by I think Israel has gone rabid, which is why the meeting with Trump that took place was from the Muslim leaders and the Arab leaders was rein in the Israelis. It's not that they're against the Israelis, it's rein them in. They've gone wild, they've gone rabid, and they've gone rabid because you keep letting them go rabid. And that's why I think for the Israelis, it's until America tells us to stop. Let's keep bombing 7 different countries in the region. Let's keep trying to plunge the country into war. There's a sense that we can keep doing it because we have that license to do so. Yeah. But I think, having said that, I think in that consistent foreign policy, there are questions being asked by the Israelis themselves. How long can we expect the Americans to keep backing us when we can visibly see that in the polls now Israel is unprecedentedly unpopular in America itself, and on both sides, on the Democrats and on the Republicans? And it remains to be seen. I think the conclusion of the Israelis is we can win back the polls later. Let's just keep going the way we are. The question is how long until America loses its patience with that?
Is Netanyahu's plan Greater Israel? The idea that Israel needs to stretch across the Muslim world and take large swathes of land from Syria, from even from Saudi Arabia, from countries in the region. Is that ultimately Israel's plan?
I think that's the dream of every Israeli. I mean, the very definition of an Israeli citizen is somebody who lives on stolen land. That's the very definition of an Israeli citizen. Yeah. An Israeli citizen is somebody who went to Palestine, found a Palestinian family living there, kicked out that Palestinian family, built a house or bought a house that was built on stolen land, and then were protected by the US, UK once upon a time, and then by the US, and then they establish a citizenship and they call it the Israeli citizen. The Israel, by its very nature, as Tom Barak put it, Israel doesn't recognize the Sykes-Picot. It's not bound by the Sykes-Picot agreement, because Israel, as it's dreamed about by the Israelis, is not within its current borders. It's supposed to expand until the chosen people take back what God promised them, according to how the Israelis perceive it, even though when you look more deeply, because the Quran also has a version of the story, as does the Torah, as does the New Testament and the Old Testament. God promised them land, provided they fulfill a number of conditions, and they failed to fulfill those conditions, so God did not give them that land. The point that I'm saying is that I think that Israel's aim has always been Greater Israel. I don't think that has ever not been the aim. I think when you look at this new consortium that's buying TikTok, in which the White House spokesman said, we're going to force the sale of TikTok, but we need to retrain the algorithm first, implying we need to make sure that when this TikTok launches, it's no longer showing people the reality of Palestine. That's making Americans change their opinion. It's no longer showing them the death and killing that's happening in Palestine. It's showing them that sanitized Israeli propaganda and the like. There was an interview with one of the members of the consortium in which he says, what does Israel mean to you? And he says, Israel is the establishment of a state for a stateless people that we should have and we're entitled to and the like. In other words, every Israeli, by definition, dreams of a Greater Israel. I think Netanyahu believes that October 7th provided a golden opportunity to provide some cover for establishing that Greater Israel. But he came across two problems. The first problem is, despite the military superiority, it's been 2 years and he hasn't been able to take Gaza. That's a military failure. He's militarily incapable of taking Gaza. The second failure is he underestimated the impact of what the carnage in Gaza would cause on public opinion in America. Because Israel can't survive without a colonial power. Israel was established with the help of the British Empire. When the British Empire collapsed, they substituted the British Empire for the US. And it's the US that provides the weapon and the finances for Israel to be able to launch its wars. The Israelis underestimated the impact of that carnage and the visual display of that carnage on social media on American public opinion to such an extent that now you have Axios reporting that Congress, in an unprecedented manner, is now wavering in its support for the Israelis. You now have Marjorie Taylor Greene pulling bills from Congress that are supposed to be in support of Israel. You have, for the first time ever, the Progressive Caucus and the Democrats in Congress now voting to stop the sale of weapons to the Israelis. You now have Donald Trump coming in and publicly saying, we reject the annexation of the West Bank. These are all things I think that the Israelis underestimated.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. I need your help. Our videos are currently being suppressed on this platform, which means they're not appearing as frequently as they used to. In fact, over the past 2 months, there's been a significant drop in impressions. Now, experts tell us this is due to a proactive decision. To resolve this, I need you all to subscribe to this channel. Over 60% of our regular viewers are still not subscribers. And, crucially, please click on the bell notification so you don't miss any future episodes. My commitment to you is that I will continue to provide free, thought-provoking content, but I need you to spread the word, comment, and keep an eye out for our shows. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, can I ask you about Qatar? Because you suggested that the Qataris were obviously taken aback by this the bombing on Doha, but their calculation so far has been to placate the Americans. Give them an airbase, ply them with lots and lots of money. This airliner that was promised a few months back. That calculation seems to have terribly failed here. What's your comment on sort of the Qatari position vis-a-vis the Americans and Israel?
So first of all, I want to say that you asked me a question about the Qataris last time, and I said they paid jizya and they got really upset.
Yes.
And in this question now, you've basically said, Sami, I'm going to make sure you don't go to Doha. But in any case, I think that the Qataris had no choice but to placate the Americans.
Right.
I think there are two questions to ask about the Israeli bombing. One, which airspace did they use to get to Doha? That in itself is a question mark to be put, because if they went through the Saudi airspace, then it implies that the Saudis were happy to see Israel hit the Qataris. And bin Salman issued an unusually very strong statement in support of the Qataris, almost as if it could be construed as support for Qatar, but could equally be construed as, wallahi, it wasn't me. A sort of guilt, wallahi, as opposed to etc. Right. The second question that is worth asking is, what could the Qataris viably do the point of the Al Udeid American military base is to protect the Qataris from such attacks. That failed to do so, meaning that the interpretation of the Americans is that that base is not designed to protect the Qataris from the Israelis. It's only designed to protect the Qataris from the Saudis, which is the very reason why Al Udeid was established. It was established to prevent a Saudi invasion in 1996 when the son Emir toppled his father, the Emir, and the Saudis wanted to restore the father Emir in Qatar. And the son said, I don't want my father to come back. I'll normalize with the Israelis. I'll bring the American Udeid base. Just don't let the Saudis invade me and the like. So it could be that the Qataris realized that Al Udeid was never designed to protect Qatar from the Israelis. It was only designed to protect Qatar from the Saudis. The third point worth noting is, what could the Qataris viably do? I think that from the Qatari perspective, the UAE position was, because Mohammed bin Zayed didn't attend the summit that the Qataris organized, the emergency summit to do a joint stand. Bin Zayed didn't attend. Bin Zayed only went to visit quickly and then he went back the same day, almost as if just to give plausible deniability. The Qataris are aware, I think, that the UAE said, the Israelis, you had one job, how did you miss? So almost if the UAE were like, this is a good development, but you know, the Israelis messed up. They're not as clever as they thought they were. The Qataris are aware that the Saudis are pursuing their own normalization of ties as it is with the Israelis at this moment in time, and the Saudis still have a sore spot when it comes to Qatar over what happened during the blockade and over the Arab Spring, etc. Although the relations are getting better, the distrust is still there. The Qataris are aware that other regional states don't want to get involved in any beef with the Israelis. The Kuwaitis don't, and the Bahrainis most certainly do not. The Moroccans don't. Tunisia, they don't want to get into beef, although they received the Samud flotilla. When the Israelis hit the flotilla, Qais Said, the Tunisian president, said, I don't want it. It wasn't the Israelis. It wasn't the Israelis. It was just something that happened on the boat itself. So the Qataris, in terms of a united front, that's impossible to achieve with the Muslim world, given that so many want good ties with the Americans and the Israelis. Can they find an alternative security structure? The Chinese have no interest whatsoever in developing an alternative security framework to the United States. Chinese have no interest in protecting Saudi Arabia's oil fields and the like. They're not interested in assuming that role for themselves. That's just not how the Chinese see themselves. The Russians don't have the capability of doing so either. So Qatar has no alternative to that US-American security structure. The Turkish military base was there but failed to prevent the attacks on the Israelis, although some reports indicate that the Turks gave the Qataris a heads up. But it does show the limitations of Turkish technology in protecting the Qataris from an attack like the Israelis. Meaning that even if they wanted to expand the Turkish military capabilities as an alternative to the security arrangement with the US, Turkey does not have, or Turkey does not have the ability in order to provide it. So we've cleared all of those possible alternatives. They simply don't exist. Qatar could withdraw its investments from the United States and say to Trump, I'm not giving you the $1.4 trillion and give me back my plane. At which point Trump could possibly say to the Saudis and UAE, run wild on Qatar. And without the support of Al Udeid, Qatar is swallowed up by the Saudis and UAE very easily. So they can't tell Trump, give me back the investments. They can't say to Trump, we want to revise all security agreements because there's no place to go. And I saw that CNN interview with the Qatari Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani. The irony of the interview is, even the presenter can sense that Qatar is trapped. Because he spends the first 15 minutes saying that Netanyahu is a bully and Israel is a bully. And then the presenter says, but what about the US? Surely the US must have greenlighted it. And he immediately panicked and went, US had nothing to do with this. US told us they had nothing to do with this. And then he got on a plane, flew to the White House, flew to Washington, and affirmed that ties with the US remain very strong and we're expanding our security cooperation. In fact, he even went so far as, when Axios reported that Qatar is reviewing all security arrangements, the Qatar Ministry of Information on its official Twitter account came out and said, we categorically deny the outrageous claims made by Axios that we are revising any security agreement with the United States. I think the Qataris, when they got hit by the Israelis, they realized just how vulnerable they actually are. And in that vulnerability, the best they could do was host some sort of summit where everybody could let off some steam and have a PR exercise, Israel is a bully power and the like. But the summit was so weak, and intentionally so, that when Reuters reported on the summit, they wrote that the conclusion was Israel's activities threatens progress towards normalization or hinders efforts to normalize ties. It wasn't we reject what Israel did. It's Israel, please stop. We're trying to normalize, but you make it really hard when you go and hit and attack Doha and the like. And I think that's the reality of the small state politics. Qatar has no options but to swallow the hit that it took in Doha and go to the Americans and try to convince Trump that this is not in its interest, that this is not in the personal interest of Donald Trump. Having said that, this angle of Trump's personal interest is something the Qataris have always sought to play on, whether it's buying Trump's hotels, giving him personal gifts. That plane that was given was not given to the presidency of the United States. It was given to Trump personally. There is a view amongst the Gulf states that Trump and Israel are not synonymous with one another. That if you can buy a personal relationship with Donald Trump, then you might be able to pressure the Israelis and the like. The final point worth mentioning here is this. The Qataris, even if they have limited options, are very much satisfied by the wider implications of the attack on Qatar, the attack on Doha. That you mentioned, Abdullah Oda said it's a turning moment. I don't think it's that much of a turning moment. But certainly what the attacks on Doha did is that it further made it difficult for Israel's allies to defend it. I think it accelerated recognition of Palestine. I think it accelerated the desire by Israel's allies to create further distance with the Israelis in order for them to keep up the pretense of keeping up international law. I think the Israelis are increasingly making themselves a pariah state. Yeah. So I think the Qataris will say, even if we can't do anything with the Americans, we'll take the damage, the reputational damage that it did to the Israelis, and we'll consider that a win.
Okay, so you say it's not a turning point. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan recently signed this defense pact, a NATO-style defense pact, no least. And
fair Allah, it's not a NATO-style defense pact, but go ahead.
Yeah. And that's how it's touted. And the argument goes that both sides will protect one another in case of enmity and war with third parties. A number of commentators have presented this as an act of deterrence, especially from the perspective of the Saudis in relation to in proximity to Israel. So, and it comes straight after the Doha attacks. I mean, is there a connection between the Doha attacks and Saudi and this agreement? And what do you think is the worthiness of this agreement?
I don't think I think the timing of the agreement was too fast for it to be a reaction to the Doha attacks. Right. Military agreements are not signed within the space of 2-3 weeks. They're signed over a group of months, which means this discussion has been ongoing since even before the Doha attacks. That's the first point. The second point is that when the Saudis themselves were hit by the Houthi missiles and the Americans failed to protect the Saudis from Iran when Iran fired missiles through its militias in Iraq and in the Houthis and the Patriot missiles, Saudi Arabia did not pursue any alternative security infrastructure. Instead, they reinforced their ties with the Americans and affirmed the security apparatus. I think this particular Pakistan-Saudi agreement is to achieve something else entirely. I think that the Saudis want closer ties with the Chinese, but the Americans have been bullying them into avoiding any ties with the Chinese. For example, the UAE signed a number of technological agreements with the Chinese, including in military hardware. The US responded by putting the UAE on the grey list of money laundering, meaning companies suddenly hesitated about their status in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi and even considered relocating because they didn't want to fall foul of any potential incoming sanctions and the like. The UAE then cancelled a number of agreements with the Chinese, and the US responded by removing UAE from the grey list of the money laundering, essentially saying to the UAE, you don't have the choice of being multipolar here. You're either with us or you are against us, and the UAE chose to be closer to the US and try to find more underhanded ways in order to be closer to the Chinese. And this is the context that I think the Saudi and Pakistan agreement has come about. I think the Saudis noticed that when those Pakistani planes or Chinese planes downed those Indian jets in that confrontation that took place, and when the reports came out that the Indian pilots did not even see the attacks coming, that those Chinese jets could see those Indian planes on their radar long before the Indian planes were able to do so, I think the Saudis are saying, how can I access that Chinese technology without upsetting the United States? And that's why I think for them to make a deal with Pakistan and then say it's some sort of Islamic security pact and then use that deal to access Chinese military hardware that the Pakistani army already has a whole host of, it's Saudi Arabia saying, look, I'm not making a deal with the Chinese. Like, don't come after me. Don't put sanctions on me. Don't threaten me. Don't ruin my Vision 2030. I'm not going to, this is just a brotherly security pact and the like, while he tells the Pakistanis, yo, give me a Chinese jet, let me have a look. Yo, give me a Chinese weapon. And the Pakistanis know how risky this is. The Pakistanis right now are in a booming relationship with the United States. Asim Munir is standing next to Donald Trump. Protocol doesn't dictate. Protocol doesn't allow a US president to stand with somebody like Asim Munir. It should be with Shehbaz Sharif or with the president. But Asim Munir is enjoying this boom in the United States and enjoying the celebration in the media that Pakistan and America are now becoming good friends again. Because as Trump and Modi's relationship deteriorates, because Modi refused to be bullied by Donald Trump when Trump imposed the tariffs, Modi said, if that's how you're going to treat me, I'm just going to go and stand with Russia and Xi Jinping in the Shanghai Cooperation Council. The Pakistanis are saying, this is excellent. We and the Americans are becoming on very good ties. The problem is that for all the good ties with the Americans, there's not enough money coming into Pakistan. And Asim Munir needs money in order to produce something for the Pakistani people to forget about Imran Khan, to forget about the troubles of Pakistan. He needs that money, but that money is not coming so quickly from the Americans. Yeah. Asim Munir knows that if he gives any Chinese weapons to the Saudis and the Americans find out, the Americans could very quickly flip. Instead of becoming close with the relationship, that relationship could deteriorate rapidly. The Americans could say, how dare you? How dare you try to hoodwink me with this deal and bring those weapons going through? So even for the Pakistanis, it's very risky to sign this agreement with Saudi when bin Salman is conditioning the financial aid on receiving those Chinese weapons, which is why this security pact, if you think about it, it's not designed for Pakistan to protect Saudi Arabia. Is Pakistan going to go to war with Iran when the Houthis fire another missile at Saudi Arabia? No. Is Pakistan going to bomb Sana'a when the Houthis fire a missile? No. Is Pakistan going to bomb the pro-Iran militias in Iraq if they fire another missile at the Royal Palace the way they did in 2019? No. So it's clearly not a security pact. It's clearly not designed on the basis of Pakistan protecting Saudi Arabia. It's designed in that bin Salman says, Asim Munir, I want Chinese weapons. Okay, but we don't want to offend the Americans. But you need money. That's true. Give me the weapons, I'll give you the money. But how do we do it without the Americans finding out? And it will be very interesting to see how Washington reacts if there is some sort of exchange, money to Pakistan in exchange for those Chinese. This is a very risky move for both Pakistan and for both Saudi Arabia. But they're both desperate for it because Saudi Arabia believes, and this is where Doha comes in. Yeah. Saudi Arabia believes if US weapons are no longer the most advanced, if they are useless in protecting Qatar, if they are useless in protecting Saudi Arabia from Houthi drones, then let me go to the Chinese who just did a military parade of all of this advanced military hardware. And I need it. I can't rely on these Americans no more. Not because I don't think the Americans will protect me. Their weapons are just not as good as they used to be. Yeah. But they won't let me access it. And I think that's what the security deal is about. That's what the security pact is about. It's money in exchange for military hardware, but trying to do so in a way where the Americans do not sanction or do not find any reason or excuse to punish both countries for going behind its back.
Right. So you don't really think it's a substantial agreement in any sort of military sense, really, the Saudis have got. And you certainly don't think that the Israelis and their actions in Doha had anything to do with this agreement.
I think that it gave a good PR cover for a deal that had nothing to do with Doha.
Right.
I think also Saudi does not have a problem with Israel. The assumption of your question is that Saudi is scared of Israel. It's not. It's on good terms with Israel.
It doesn't think that it's next.
Saudi Arabia does not believe that it's next. Saudi Arabia believes that it's shown so much goodwill to the Israelis. Saudi believes that when the Muslim world put pressure on Saudi Arabia to do something for Palestine, bin Salman thinks he was a genius when he sent Sudais to give dua in the Haram and everyone ameen and said that's sufficient for us. While the entire Saudi media apparatus, Al-Arabiya, Al-Hadath, etc., if you open it, if whoever's listening to this podcast, if you open Al-Arabiya now, English and Arabic, you would think it's broadcasting from Tel Aviv. They are broadcasting anti-Palestinian propaganda. Bin Salman is saying, my whole media apparatus is still on your side. Bin Salman is saying to the Israelis, I know you're not going to come for me because the billions of dollars I gave to Jared Kushner, in which I gave him express permission to visit the Israelis, none of that money has been withdrawn from the Israelis. In Silicon Valley, here in the US where we're talking, most of the money or a significant proportion of the money invested in Zionist companies are coming from Saudi Arabia and from the fund from Vision 2030. The El Al, the Israeli airline, daily is flying to Dubai. If you open your phone now, Flight Radar, you'll find that today, the flight from Tel Aviv to Dubai went over Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia hasn't even closed its airspace. you'll find that the land bridge from UAE to Israel that goes through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Erbil is still in action. Nobody stopped that land bridge from going. It's not that Israel doesn't want to go after Saudi Arabia. Bin Salman believes he's shown so much goodwill during this genocide to the Israelis. Why on earth would they come after me? Bin Salman's pursuit of Chinese weapons has nothing to do with protecting him from the Israelis. Bin Salman wants Saudi Arabia to be a major power. And he believes that I want to build my cities to look like Miami. But I want the best weaponry. I want the best technology. And I want to get it from the Chinese because they're clearly the Ford CEO, American Ford CEO, just a few months ago told the audience that if Ford does not produce an answer to the EV cars coming out of China, his words, not mine, Ford will become bankrupt. Everybody is looking at those Chinese cars. I went to Kazakhstan. I know it's an anecdote and it's bad form. I went to Kazakhstan. You see all these Chinese cars on the streets. I promise you, Jalal, they look nicer than the Tesla. They drive better than the Tesla. The technology is incredible. China is no longer a poor quality product. It's a high-tech product. The Americans are trying to use brute force to prevent their allies from making closer ties with the Chinese, which is why Trump tried to bully India. But India literally looked at Trump and said, okay, if that's how you're going to treat me, I'm going to go to China. The Saudis are saying, I'm not quite as brave as Modi is. I want to do it through a hidden way. I want to do it through this Pakistan security pact. But the idea that Saudi is worried that Israel is going to take large chunks of Saudi Arabia, Saudi is partnering up with Israel in order to try to achieve its domestic aims. It's partnered with the Israeli lobby to get support for Vision 2030. It's partnered with the Israelis in Gaza. It's partnered in, it has common aims. When you look at Saudi commentators on Al Arabiya, they all say that the war ends when the hostages are released. Israel is not even saying that anymore. Saudi commentators are saying that that Hamas needs to be disarmed. It's exactly the same what the Israelis are saying. This idea of an international authority being put in Gaza, it's being pushed by Saudi media. You implied when you said Tony Blair, the person listening thinks it's a foreign plan from the US and the Zionists. It's discussed with Saudi and the UAE. They're on board with it entirely, completely. And that's why I think that this security pact, what the Doha attacks allowed bin Salman to do, they allowed bin Salman to claim that it's directed at the Israelis. And that works very well for the PR. But I don't think Saudi is as scared of the Israelis as it should be. And I don't think bin Salman appreciates the threat that the Israelis pose to him, in that he believes that appeasement will get him the privileges that Qatar got when it appeased the Israelis, that UAE got when it appeased the Israelis. But Israel is different now. Israel believes this is not the generation where we need to play politics anymore. This is a generation where Israel can bomb 7 Muslim countries without any response and count on the US veto to protect them from any repercussions.
How about the Turkish-Egyptian joint naval exercise in the Mediterranean? First in the 13 years. I mean, these two countries were hostile towards one another a few years ago. Commentators have suggested that this was a message that the two countries were sending to Israel. Do you buy that, or do you think there's other reasons behind it?
I think it is very plausible that the intention was to send a message to the Israelis. Sisi is under heavy pressure. Sisi is under pressure from the UAE and from the Israelis to open the border and take in the Palestinians into the Sinai Peninsula. Sisi believes the moment he opens that border and the Palestinians come into Sinai, the Israelis will invade Sinai and take it, and the Americans and UAE will support the Israelis against Egypt. UAE has been trying to give money to Egypt in order to let them take in the refugees, and the Egyptians are saying, we don't want them in here, we're not having the Palestinians in here, we're not letting you take Sinai. The perception of the threat is such that there has been a buildup of the Egyptian forces on the Sinai Peninsula in such a manner that Netanyahu went to the White House to complain to Donald Trump that the Egyptians are developing their forces on the Sinai. Can you tell them to back off so I can push the Palestinians in there? Sisi, when he looks to Saudi Arabia, finds no support. When he looks to the UAE, he finds no support. When he looks everywhere, I'm isolated, he feels isolated, and he feels like he's being bullied. Even when people protest in the Egyptian embassy, the reason the Egyptians felt so hard done by is they said, okay, I get it if you call me a traitor, but why aren't you doing it to the Saudi embassy? Why aren't you doing it to the UAE embassy? And then Sisi, in order to try to bring some peace, he negotiated with the British. They released Ala Abdel Fattah from prison recently in exchange for greater security in the Egyptian embassies to avoid that humiliation. So Sisi now finds himself turning to Erdogan to say to Erdogan, listen, I'm stuck. Like, I know you came to me before and you begged me and I gave you a hard time in the reconciliation. Times have changed, now I'm going to you. Erdogan, like, help me out. Erdogan relishes the opportunity to, after having been criticized for continuing trading with the Israelis, to be seen as showing some muscle against the Israelis. So he welcomes this opportunity to do drills on the Mediterranean to suggest that there is an Egyptian-Turkish military alliance that is emerging. It's designed to send a message that there is a possibility of a changing shift in the region. But I think it's also significant that the Turkish and Egyptian ships during those military exercises did nothing about the Sumud flotilla, indicating they said, our message is limited. Our message is Israel, like the way it is now is fine, but don't push it too much in the Sinai Peninsula. We're not going to offend you by going to support the flotilla. Erdogan, you remember, refused to allow the flotilla to depart from Istanbul because he didn't want the headache coming from the Israelis later on. But I think that Sisi's desperation is certainly opening doors with the Turks. The question is, how ambitious are the Turks in taking that relationship? We know that Haftar is sending a delegation to Istanbul as a goodwill gesture from the Turks to the Egyptians to say, I'm no longer on one side of the Libyan field. I'm not supporting Tripoli. I'm now opening up the fronts and I'm moving away from the ideological, and let's talk about how we can both benefit from Libya, something the Egyptians welcome. I think it's more that it depends on how ambitious the Turks are and just how desperate Sisi is, particularly given that, can he see an Egypt that doesn't rely on the UAE? I don't know how wild Sisi can dream.
Do you think that Turkey feels threatened by Israel at the moment?
I think most certainly Turkey feels that after Doha, it's possible Ankara could get hit and Istanbul could get hit, which is why there's news apparently that Erdogan wants to build some bunkers underneath and the like. But what is worth noting about Turkey is that Turkey is not, or Turkey, before the Turks get really upset and put in the comments and say whatever, etc. Turkey has always believed that it will get to a stage where Israel is going to attack it. Erdogan knew it from the moment he took power. He's going to get to a stage where the Israelis are going to attack him. That's the whole reasoning behind the whole Bayraktars building their own ships, building the Akinji, building their own planes. The Turks are desperate to build their own weapons that can compete. The reason they're desperate to do so is not because they want to compete with the Americans militarily. They know a time is going to come when the Israelis are going to attack Turkey with the support of the Americans, or at least with America standing out. So the Turks are like, okay, let me buy time. That's the whole reason why I think Erdogan is trading during the genocide, while Erdogan believes this is not the right time. I still need a few years. I need a few years to build the army.
Do you agree with that?
I believe that's Erdogan's ideal dream. I even believe that with what's happened in Syria, Erdogan, bear in mind, Erdogan is well versed in Muslim history. I think with what happened in Syria, Erdogan got very excited. Erdogan says, this is fantastic. Because Syria, the world is saying Syria is free, but in reality, Syria is free but reliant on me. Therefore, not only is Erdogan in a position to build now a Turkish army, Erdogan is the one who's going to build the Syrian army. Erdogan is the one who's going to now be able to access an additional army on top of that, which is why the Israelis are screaming at Donald Trump. Bear in mind, Jalal, Netanyahu has visited the White House like 4 or 5 times this year. It's unprecedented. The reason he keeps coming to the White House is there are problems that he's struggling to fix over the phone. When he goes to Trump and he tells Trump, you don't understand. Erdogan dreams of destroying us. Erdogan in Syria is the prime beneficiary. Trump is saying, but hang on a second, he's keeping the peace. He's doing the security for us. He's a NATO ally. I like him. The guy knows how to rig elections, according to what Trump said yesterday. He likes those strong men and the like. Although I don't believe that Erdogan rigged the elections in the way that Trump implies. But in any case, the point that I'm saying is, Erdogan is in a position whereby I won in Syria. That's his perception. I won. You know when Trump said Turkey achieved in Syria what no one achieved for 1,000 years? Because according to Trump, Sharaa doesn't survive without Turkey. And he's probably right. He would not have survived so long without Turkey. This is Erdogan who made a bet on Ahmed al-Sharaa, and he won that bet. Now Syria is naturally inclined towards Turkey. If Erdogan builds the army in Turkey and then builds an army in Syria, are you telling me that Erdogan builds both armies and then says, let's make peace with Israel and let's all live happily ever after? Do you believe that, Jalal? No. Do you think Erdogan says, what does Erdogan think instead? He thinks Egypt next. Why? Because historically, that's the way he thinks Egypt, which is why he welcomes the drills. He's thinking, oh my God, it's starting to pan out. Turkey, Syria, Libya now, Egypt now doing drills with me, and alienated from the UAE and be increasing alien from Saudi Arabia. If I can convince Sisi, or at least the Egyptian army, that they should join this triumvirate of Syria, Turkey, and Egypt, this is why the Israelis bomb the living daylights out of Syria. They know what's coming next. They've read history. Zionists don't view the Muslim Ummah within the borders that Sykes-Picot imposed on us. Israel views the Ummah as a united Ummah. Israel, the Zionists, they view the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad as an Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad. The Muslims don't. Muslims view it as Syria, as Lebanon, as Tunisia, as Egypt, and the like. You know, I'm in America trying to talk about Syria and raise some awareness on it. And you talk to audiences, and it's almost like you're talking about some foreign, abstract concept. In the masajid, they learn about, Asham, and they're like, Bilad Asham, for the Muslims. But when you tell them Syria, they're like, okay, but, we have other priorities. Israel doesn't see a disconnect between Syria and Gaza. It sees no border. It knows what happens in Syria is going to affect Gaza. What happens in Syria is going to affect Palestine. What happens between Turkey and Syria is going to affect Palestine. What happens Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey affects Palestine. What happens Turkey, Zionists don't see the borders, which is why Tom Barak said something almost omatic when he said Israel doesn't recognize the Sykes-Picot. Nobody does. But the reason why I'm saying this is I think that Erdogan, his issue with the genocide, albeit it's a horrible position that he's taken, and anybody can go thinking Muslim and they'll listen to what I've said in the past. Erdogan's stance is not, Bin Salman's position is, I hope Israel gets what it wants in Gaza. I want Hamas ruined. I think when it comes to the UAE, their aims, they want Israel to succeed in Gaza. They looked at Doha and they said, why didn't they know the time for Asr? If they had known, they could have waited. They could have, they had one job and they flopped miserably. But I think Erdogan's position is different. Erdogan's position is, why does it have to happen now? I've built a Bayraktar. I just need more time. I just need a bit more time and then I'll be ready. Erdogan's position is, this happened too soon. And that's why he's trying to play that balance. How do I preserve what I've built without risking it all on something that, can be resolved differently? That's not a justification for Erdogan. Yeah. I'm saying that because the premise is different, they will produce very different results.
Right. No, okay. So buying time on that subject, you're here in America, you're doing the rounds, you're talking about Syria, you're working with a Syrian group. Ahmed Al-Sharaa was in New York, of course. He addressed the General Assembly for the first time, and he met with US officials. He gave a talk with General Petraeus, which a lot of people found slightly problematic, or quite problematic. Do you think that we had a whole show on this, of course, and we talked about how Syria is in a very precarious position, and what else can he do? He needs to buy time, and then he needs to create some sort of space between himself and the designs of the Israelis. From where you're sitting now, do you think the same about Syria and Ahmed Al-Sharaa? And do you feel that the Israelis are finding ways and means to undermine him, despite what the Americans say about him?
I think that in general, Muslims and Israelis are aligned in terms of their criticism of Ahmed Al-Sharaa. The Israelis insist that he's lying, and the Muslims insist that he's lying. The Israelis insist that he's lying in that he wants peace. He doesn't. He wants 5-10 years to rebuild Syria and then put his hand with Erdogan and come after us.
Are you convinced of that?
The Muslims are saying he's lying and that he wants normalization with the Israelis and he wants to hold power. So Israelis and Muslims are the only two groups at this moment who are insisting that he's lying.
Yeah.
You said that the interview with Petraeus was problematic. When I saw the interview, I saw a general who had tried to get rid of Ahmed Al-Sharaa, forced to interview him and call him Mr. President on the stage. I saw Ahmed Al-Sharaa tell Petraeus, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ, tell Petraeus that you tried to come after me 25 years, your military efforts failed, I'm willing to handle this through dialogue. We don't need to fight no more. I heard Petraeus try to push normalization, and Ahmed Al-Sharaa push back and say, I'm not normalizing, we're not the same as the other countries that did it, but I'll discuss a ceasefire in the 1972 ceasefire agreement. The Israelis are saying we want normalization. He's saying I want a ceasefire agreement. And there's a reason why they are arguing over the terminology. Yeah. Normalization implies that Ahmed Al-Sharaa sees a future in the region in which Israel exists and that Israel is a part of the region. Yeah. Ceasefire implies that I have no energy right now to deal with you. You're not my priority. I want to rebuild Damascus, which has 2 hours of electricity a day. The Iranians and the Israelis have shared interest in Syria today. They both want to carve Syria into 4. I need to deal with the Iranians first. They're the more immediate threat. And therefore, I want to ceasefire with the Israelis. I'm telling you, Americans, I'm not going to do anything to them. Not because I like the Israelis, but because I have no means to do so, and they're not my priority. That's not a defense of Ahmad al-Sharaa. It's a logical conclusion of how he views his power there at this particular time. The third point, Ahmad al-Sharaa went from hiding in a cave to standing in the United Nations and sitting with David Petraeus in New York, recognized internationally as the president of Syria. That's not a small thing. Fourthly, the Israelis tried to prevent Ahmad al-Sharaa from coming to New York, insisting that he should not be recognized, that we shouldn't work with Damascus. Meaning the Israeli lobby against Syria at this moment is not as strong as the Zionists would like it to be.
Yeah.
That may be because of the concessions that Ahmad al-Sharaa is making to the Americans. But what are these concessions that Ahmad al-Sharaa is offering? Ahmad al-Sharaa is telling the Americans that, and this doesn't happen under Harris, by the way. Under a Democrat, I don't think Ahmad al-Sharaa comes to New York. This is a uniquely Trump phenomenon because under the Democrats, Israelis have their way in foreign policy in Syria. There was never a discussion on the part of the Democrats about whether they should leave Syria. Obama flirted with it, but eventually ceded to CENTCOM. The only time there was a serious discussion about withdrawing from Syria was when Trump came to power. And the reason had nothing to do with American interests. Trump just said, why do I need to spend money for this? Erdogan says he can send in troops to keep the security. Why don't we just trust Erdogan, who's a NATO ally? Ahmad al-Sharaa is telling the Americans, these are the concessions, that you're spending so much money on American troops in the northeast of Syria. You think you need to keep control of the oil. I'm not averse to trading oil with you. I'm not here to boycott you. You don't need to have your troops over there. Just let me send in my army. I'll work with the Turks. I'll keep the peace. I'll prevent ISIS and the terrorist activities from taking place over there. Why do you need to be there? And Trump says, actually, that's a good point. Why do I need to be there? The Israelis are saying, no, he wants you out so he can assert his control. Trump is saying, well, why does he have in control hurt American interests? The Israelis are saying, okay, but it hurts our interests. And Trump is saying, but how does it hurt American interests? And the Israelis are saying, Israel is America. And Trump is saying, in Syria, not necessarily. Because when you guys go into Suwayda and you cause a ruckus, I have to spend money and I got to go protect them and I got to send in troops and I got to go deal with terrorism threats again and the like. I don't understand Israel. Why don't just let the guy keep the country together and keep the Iranians out of it? Isn't that in your benefit? The point is, Ahmad al-Sharaa's presence, this is the fourth point, aside from talking to Petraeus there. And the fourth point is that the Israeli lobby is failing to influence US policy with regards to Syria, which is why the Israelis are trying to force a status quo in Syria by which you have Hikmat al-Hijri, Suwayda in the south. Let's force it into an autonomous region, or let's force a conflict between Damascus and between the Druze that makes the Americans come in to protect the Druze, and that way we force Trump into a conflict, like they tried with Iran, that he cannot extricate himself from. So I don't know how problematic necessarily that was. Somebody in one of the Q&A sessions when I was in Texas said to me, this is not the time to be talking about peace with the Israelis. My focus is not on whether he wants peace with the Israelis. My focus is, when Israel went to bomb Iran, which airspace did they use? Syria's airspace. Did the Israelis ask Syria? No. If they ask Syria, does Syria have the ability even to say yes or no? Does Syria have the means to prevent it? The reason Syria does not have the means to prevent it is because Russia and Iran destroyed it into oblivion. Syria is out of action. Somebody said no, but the Syrians should right now be taking a firm stance with Gaza. And again, I'm not justifying it. I'm saying let's go through these arguments. But that's the equivalent of trying to find frontline soldiers, but you don't find able men. You go to the hospital, you find those with broken legs, broken arms and the like, and you tell them you need to now go fight on the front line. It's unreasonable to expect Syria to do so. Yeah. Which is why my point is not about what I think about Ahmad al-Sharaa or not. That's completely irrelevant. Because it doesn't matter who's in power in Damascus. Whoever rules Syria today rules over a broken country. Whoever rules over Syria today rules over a country that has no army. Or if they have an army, it's still not yet a professional army, which has no economy, which has no missiles, it has no anti-air missiles. It doesn't have the capacity to do anything, which is why Erdogan and Ahmad al-Sharaa are lobbying the Americans and saying to the Americans, There's a 1972 ceasefire. It doesn't need to be normalization of ties. Listen, Trump, market it however you want. We will tell our people it's a ceasefire agreement because we want a ceasefire agreement. You go and tell the people it's a normalization. Who gives a damn? We know it's a ceasefire agreement. Muslims are saying, no, we need the Israelis to say it's a ceasefire agreement. And the Israelis are happy with that. They're like, for once, us and the Muslims are in the same camp. You know, we both don't like Ahmed Al-Sharaa for this reason, because he wants a ceasefire. He wants peace in that regard. The Israelis don't want peace with Ahmed Al-Sharaa. The Israelis are terrified that if Syria gets 5-10 years, it looks completely different. And Syria is not Tunisia. Syria is not Libya. Syria, historically, Zionists know history. Syria is the gateway to Palestine. If you allow a Syria to be free and allied with Turkey on top, and then coerce bin Salman, who realizes Syria is rebuilding itself, so he joins the bandwagon as well, that's the regime, the region completely changes. Add on top of that a wild card like Donald Trump, where you can't predict what he's going to do next. With Biden, at least he was a Zionist. With Trump, it's who offers him the best deal, which I think the Muslim world hasn't yet offered him a good deal. But I'm not praising Trump in that regard. And that's why I argue that Ahmed Al-Sharaa being New York is a huge win for the Syrians. It's a huge win against the Zionists who plan something different for Syria. That doesn't mean Ahmed Al-Sharaa is good. I don't know what to make of him. I reserve my judgment on what Ahmed Al-Sharaa. Not that I don't think he really cares about what I think of him, and I don't think Syrians are interested in what I think of Ahmed Al-Sharaa. That's irrelevant. My point is, what are the Israelis terrified of? The reconstruction of Syria. Reconstruct Syria, it doesn't matter who leads it. Once it's reconstructed, the Israelis know the region doesn't look the same as it did 10 years ago.
Have you not thought about going to Syria yourself, Sami?
So I had a couple of invitations to go. And I was going to go check it out as other people did.
Yeah.
What made me hesitate was what happened to Abdurrahman Qaradawi, to put it bluntly. He goes to the Umayyad Masjid, films himself. He criticized the Saudis and the UAE. In fairness, nothing happened to him in Syria. Like, absolutely nothing happened to him in Syria. He crossed the border into Lebanon, he was kidnapped. When he was kidnapped in Lebanon, he was deported to the UAE, and he's disappeared. That's nothing on Syria itself.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if the region yet is... I'm not sure it's time yet to go and...
We need to keep you on our show, so we don't...
But also sometimes, it's like sometimes I say, I've set some Turkish friends of mine one day. They said to me, you know, brother, we need to stand with Turkey. I said, yes, but I hope Erdogan never has any power to rule over me. They said, what do you mean? I said, like, I like him insofar as in the Kemalist, you know, like the battle, you know, for the re-Islamization. But I believe in a country of rule of law, not a country where somebody can waltz in and, you know, change things as he wishes. So Erdogan is best loved from afar, not from up close. So I think maybe, I'm not applying this to Syria, but I think there's no need necessarily to rush to go to these countries at this moment in time. We pray, inshallah, that Allah looks after them and preserves them, that Allah protects them, inshallah. But, you know, the world is not as, the world's it's more scary than it used to be.
Can I ask you about the European countries and how they've decided to declare a Palestinian state? I mean, Keir Starmer in Britain, who's really worked with the Zionists. You know, if you talk about Biden as Zionist, Keir Starmer is a Zionist, right? But he's now changed track. I mean, I think Macron really led the efforts. In fact, Macron just said yesterday or the day before yesterday that he even envisages if the Gaza, he didn't call it a genocide, but if the Gaza slaughter continues, that the West should put sanctions on Netanyahu. There is a shift in tempo there. Do you think that's a genuine shift, or really the same as usual?
I think it's a genuine shift, but not because of any love for Palestine.
Right.
Jalal, you will remember, because you were heavily involved, you remember the Muslim vote that took place in the UK. And you will remember that out of about 50, 60 safe seats, these seats suddenly became marginal seats. And Labour, although they won an overwhelming majority in Parliament, they got a huge majority with the lowest share of any winning party. They got 32%. Many of these safe seats, where they had a majority of 30,000, they ended up with 200. Where they had 28,000, they had 700. In Layan, Muhammad's district, they ended up with only 700 majority.
500, yeah.
500 majority. Yeah. Labour noticed this. So Labour sent out listening parties to different communities to basically say, okay, this was a blip. This was everybody was angry with Gaza, but they'll forget about it. People get tired of protesting. They'll stop boycotting. They'll stop tweeting. They'll stop sharing. They'll get bored. They will be disheartened by the lack of results. Let's just send the people, go and listen to them, make them feel like they're being listened to, so that we can shut this page and focus on the far right. 1 year passes, council elections comes. Council elections come, and you remember, Reform got a whole load of council seats, but also independent candidates, again with the Gaza vote again, also got a whole load of seats. This was followed by the protests that took place. About 300,000 people marched through London as well for Palestine and Gaza. Starmer in that period would come out and say that we are thinking about recognizing a Palestinian state. Because Starmer's calculation is, okay, it's been a year and a half, and these guys are still not letting it go. And Nigel Farage is surging in the polls. If I've got a far right that is rising rapidly by Nigel Farage, I don't have time to deal with a leak that's over here. I'm leaking badly on this side. So let me stop this leak so I can focus on the far right. Let me give them a recognition of Palestine, which practically means nothing, but at least they can consider it a win, and then they can go back to Labour. We can stop these independent movements and the like and whatnot. Isaac Herzog gets on a plane, flies to London, meets with Starmer 2 weeks ago. Tells him, Starmer, are you serious? Are you about to recognize a Palestinian state? I imagine Starmer said to him, listen, it's gone on for 2 years now, and you don't understand. It's not that I don't support you. It's that I'm going to suffer electorally for it. Not because the Gaza anti-genocide vote alone is going to topple me. It comes in tandem with this growing far-right movement. I'm leaking votes on both sides. At least if I plug this one, then I can spend the next 2 years focusing on Nigel Farage. So don't worry, I haven't turned on you. I just need this for my domestic politics.
Yeah.
Herzog said, I don't allow you to do this. I know it's a ploy, but once you recognize Palestine, you can't reverse that. Once you recognize it, you start a domino effect. And Starmer, I think, told Herzog, you don't need to worry, it won't be like that. Which is why then afterwards they don't do a proper press conference with each other. Instead, they released statements saying it was a tough and stormy meeting that took place. Macron, he sees Le Pen, the far right, rising. In the last presidential election, she got like 40-something%. Yeah. He's worried that in the next election, he's going to get smashed. So he says, okay, let me do an early election, catch everybody off guard, and increase my share of the votes and humiliate the far right. Either if they win seats, then they will rule and embarrass themselves. But in any case, I'll do early election, catch everybody off guard. So he calls the election, and he's looking at the far right. The election results produce a win for who? Mélenchon. 35% or 35% on the other side. Mélenchon wins by uniting 4 parties, and the anti-genocide vote, all of them rally with Mélenchon. Macron panics so much at Mélenchon's victory that he ends up allying with the far right. Macron, his calculation is, I'm looking this way and I got hit this way. Let me plug this so I can focus on this. Let me recognize a Palestinian state so these guys will come back to voting for me while I focus on the far right. Israel says, what on earth are you doing? What on earth are you doing? Macron says, it's just a ploy. I need it for domestic politics. But if you do it, it can't be reversed. I need to focus on my domestic politics. Starmer and Macron essentially say to Israel, I like you guys, but I'm not losing my seat for you. I like you guys, but you're a political liability. I like you guys, but because of you, I'm losing these votes. I like you guys, but I need to create distance here. I like you guys, but for the first time in history, to be seen to be too close to you is costing me domestically in the elections. It's exactly the same as the Mamdani effect, where Cuomo now no longer mentions the Israelis. Italy, of course, doesn't recognize Palestine. They refuse to do so. But the following day, there's a mass strike across Italy in defense of Palestine, which is why Italy, although didn't recognize Palestine, ended up sending the ship to the Samud flotilla so that Meloni can say to those who are striking, stop accusing me of being pro-Israel. I may not have recognized Palestine, but at least I sent the warship. The Israelis are saying, why did you send the warship? And Meloni says, I may like you, but I'm not losing because of you. You're becoming a political liability, so I'm going to send that warship over there. Spain may be genuine, but it may also be that they've noticed as a left-wing party that an overwhelming number of their base are pro-Palestinian. They know it's a sensitive issue. They know when one of the pro-Palestinian ministers was sacked, it caused a big, huge backlash from their base. So Spain says, listen, I don't want to provoke the Israelis, but if I don't do anything, I'm going to lose anyway. They're a political liability. So let me recognize a Palestinian state. Let me end arms deals. Let me go and do it just so I can make sure that my base. Israel says, what are you doing? And they say to the Israelis, listen, I got my base. I like you guys, but I'm not willing to lose an election over you. Like, I'm not. It became a political liability, and that's why the Israelis are panicking over this recognition of Palestine. It's not that they believe it will end the genocide. It's the reasoning why these countries are recognizing Palestine. They are recognizing Palestine, not because Muslim states lobbied them to do so. Saudi Arabia tried to claim credit. Al-Arabiya today, all of it is, this is recognition, all because of Saudi Arabia. But not a single one of France, UK, of Norway, of Spain, not even BBC, not even Reuters. No one is crediting the Saudis. They had nothing to do with it. It's rather the domestic circumstances that led to all this recognition of Palestine. And that's what the Israelis are worried about in these upcoming midterm elections in the US. They are terrified that not only if Mamdani wins in New York, then we can argue that it's just New York. AOC won in New York. But what if Omar Fatah wins in Minnesota? What if in Texas Ted Cruz loses after that humiliating interview that he did with Tucker Carlson when Americans realize that Ted Cruz is Israel first instead of America first? What happens if there's a senator in Michigan who came out and said, I will no longer take any penny from AIPAC? What happens if those progressive caucus and the Democrats who are voting now against the arms, what happens if their congressmen come out and say, what if it becomes a political asset to say, I took no money from AIPAC? What if it becomes a political asset to say, I'm not associated with the Israelis? The Israelis are in panic mode. They've never been in this kind of situation before, where as a result of domestic politics, as a result of grassroots politics, as a result of things happening on the ground, their allies are now looking at the Israelis and saying, it used to be I had to be allied with you to win, but if I'm too close to you, I'm going to lose. And that's why we see this wave of the Palestinian recognition, and that's why Netanyahu responded by saying we will never recognize a Palestinian state. And it's why Netanyahu is telling his base that the world is listening to these Palestinians, and they're listening to these thinking Muslims, and they're listening to Omar, and they're listening to Jalal and these others and whatnot. And but this is why we need to be self-sufficient, and it's why they are spending so much money to try to prevent Mamdani from winning in New York.
Sami, I know that Omar is looking at me at the moment. He wants to whisk you away to another Syrian dinner probably and talk, but I've just got a couple more questions for you. From what you've said there in your answer, electoral politics really does matter, and our ability to influence, meaning those who are pro-Gaza, our ability to influence through the ballot box impacts the behavior of these leaders.
It's less electoral politics and more public opinion. It's when you galvanize a population to move against genocide, then tools such as elections, as electoral politics, it manifests in that electoral politics. Because it's not just electoral politics. It's not just the elections that influence this recognition of Palestine. It's also boycott. Starbucks is having to shut down a whole number of stores again. McDonald's is having to shut down a whole number of stores again. We're seeing Danish companies now divest from the Israelis. We're seeing Norwegians saying we need to divest from the Israelis. Why? Because they're all worried about the boycott. Electoral politics is just one angle of it. The real crux of it is that genocide has resulted in a public moving in such a way across multiple industries. Microsoft are now turning off their surveillance systems, access to their surveillance systems, to some of the Israeli units that were using them before, after a Drop Site and Guardian expose which showed how Israelis were using them to kill the Palestinians. Microsoft is saying that we are so worried about the economic impact of an angry public opinion over our role in supporting this genocide that we would rather cut the access off from the Israelis rather than offend this public opinion. It's more than just electoral politics. It's when society decides to move, they are realizing they can make impact at the highest level. This is not a top-down movement. This is ordinary people demonstrating that they can change entire policy if they decide to commit, move, and deploy the powers that they already have within themselves. They may not be billionaires like Elon Musk, but their impact is greater than the billionaire like Elon Musk. They may not have the armies that they desire, but those flotillas going and the subsequent media impact and the subsequent domestic pressure and the subsequent protests and the subsequent boycott and the subsequent results in Macron turning around and saying, I'm going to offend the Israelis because I'd rather they were on board than the Israelis were on board. It's the impact of when you actually move and you actually deploy the powers that you already have instead of waiting around for powers that you don't have. It's the recognition that collective action is greater than an individual with all the power in the world. It's that when everybody moves together in multiple fronts, in multiple industries, you can isolate the Israelis in an unprecedented manner, whereby now the whole world is rendering Israel a pariah state. Yeah. And I think an end in genocide is only a matter of time.
I mean, Sami, you've been talking about the American right for some time. I mean, for a couple of years, in fact, we've been having conversations about the American right. It never really hit me until I went to Texas that there is a shift, and that shift is palpable. and that shift is pretty much anti-Israel and anti-Zionism. And of course, the murder of Charlie Kirk, in a way, focused attention of the right, of the American right, on Israel and its nefarious activities. Now, I'm not asking you to comment on the killing itself, but I wonder how you see that progressing. Like, in which direction is that moving, and is it, I would imagine the Israelis are trying to fight back. How are they doing that?
I think what's significant about what happened in the Charlie Kirk assassination, and everybody condemns political violence, even if some of his statements were exceptionally abhorrent.
Yeah.
But in any case, I think what was significant about it is, beyond the political assassination, is everything that came out about it had to do with the Israelis. Candace Owens blaming the Israelis. I'm not saying it's true or not. I have no idea. Bill Ackman having to write an essay to defend accusations that he was somehow involved and that he was pulling money out of Charlie Kirk because Charlie Kirk was insisting on America first instead of Israel first. Laura Loomer had tweeted 2 weeks prior that Charlie Kirk was talking out of both sides of his mouth in a criticism of Charlie Kirk speaking out against the Israelis. Marjorie Taylor Greene published a text message exchange with Charlie Kirk in which he invited her to a convention that Israelis had asked Marjorie Taylor Greene not to attend, asked the organizers not to let Marjorie Taylor Greene to attend. Marjorie Taylor Greene published these text messages where she said she was invited by Charlie Kirk to talk about AIPAC's influence over the US politics. And he said, it's not a debate, I just want you to come and talk about it. And we all know her opinion. Her opinion is they need to register as a foreign agent. They're not America first, and they are abusing their relationship with the Americans. Candace Owens says, I know you killed my friend and I will never let you get away with it. I'm not debating or assessing the truth of any of their particular statements. I think it's noteworthy that Americans are beginning to realize that Zionism is not necessarily an ally of the Americans, that Zionists receive free healthcare in Israel at the expense of the healthcare of ordinary Americans. That when you go to Texas and the like, and you see somebody struggling, when they go to a hospital, they see their daughter needs an emergency treatment, and they see the state of the healthcare when they're trying desperately, they see their family member struggling. And then they're realizing that one of the reasons money doesn't exist for it is because it goes to Israel to support the genocide and the slaughter of kids. It's not that the Americans are becoming pro-Palestinian. It's that Americans are realizing that they've been taken for a ride by the Zionists. And that's as a result of social media, which is why when you were asking the question, what are Zionists doing in retaliation? They are forcing the sale of TikTok. They are trying to buy TikTok to retrain the algorithm because they want Americans to stop hearing the truth. They are desperately trying to restore the filters of information of what gets fed to the American people. They're trying to restore the veil between the truth and between the American people because they're realizing that 70 years of propaganda, paid propaganda on the Americans, is being torn apart by 2 years of exposing Americans to the actual truth. No one is saying to the Americans you have to be pro-Palestinian. It's look at what your taxpayer money is doing. Look where it's going. Look what the Zionists are lobbying your government to do. Look how they are taking priority over your basic interests. And the Americans are saying, oh my God, I had no idea this is what was happening. And I think the impact of that cannot be understated because when you have a situation where Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson on the right are commending Mamdani on the left by saying that he was right to prioritize New York over the Israelis, it shows you this is not a right or left issue. This is an America issue. Does America belong to the Americans or is America a proxy of the Israelis? And I think the more Americans are waking up to the extent of the damage that Zionism has done to their system, I think that's resulting in a permanent political shift that is beginning to filter. And I think we'll see it most manifest when the Democrat Party leadership beef with the base over who should receive the Democrat nomination. Because Mamdani won, but it's the party leadership fighting against Mamdani. Trump and Cuomo are allying together. Trump making an offer to Eric Adams to join the administration, to pull him out of the New York race, to prevent Mamdani from winning. Cuomo and Trump are trying to ally together, or the Zionists around Trump are allying together in order to prevent Mamdani from winning. Why? To ensure that the invincibility of Zionism is protected. And there's one other thing worth mentioning. You look at, for example, Trump and a number of his appointees. Zionists are not happy with all of those appointees. You look at, for example, his Presidential Council on Religious Freedoms. You've got people there who are anti-Zionist, who Zionists tried to remove and Trump did not remove them. And the point being is that with the message that's going out, Americans, their hearts are genuinely flipping. And they're flipping because when you trust, and this is my opinion, when you trust the good in people to see the truth for what it is, What we are realizing, what I'm realizing, what everybody else is realizing is, all we ever needed to do was show the truth in its raw form to the world. And no amount of $1 million propaganda could hide that truth anymore. And the hearts flip permanently. And Israel has no idea how much money it needs to spend in order to restore it. No matter what it spends, it seems that it's losing it permanently.
Sami Hamdi, Jazakallah khair. I mean, I maybe just to add to that point you raised about suppressing content. I mean, it's very clear to us now that even in our channel, Thinking Muslim, we've had some major suppression of our videos on this platform. And I think a lot of pro-Palestine voices have faced the same. You know, there is a move on these channels. You talked about TikTok here. There is a move now to suppress as much as possible. I just wonder whether, you know, the opportunity we've had, and it still has been a very slim and limited opportunity, but the opportunity we've had, nevertheless, over the last 2 years, to use these platforms is now going to be severely limited.
Not at all. Think about it this way. Times of Israel reported, this was maybe 8-9 months ago, that the Israelis had set up an AI bot to respond to people who criticize what Israel is doing in terms of committing a genocide in Palestine. 2 weeks later, that same AI bot ended up telling people that Israel is an apartheid genocidal state. TikTok, how many times they tried to adjust the algorithm and it kept showing Palestinian content and changing opinion? How many times has Grok on Twitter, on X, how many times has Grok had to have been adjusted? And when you ask Grok, it says, I was adjusted because my founders believed that I was showing too much of Israel's genocide and what's happening in Palestine. They think they can retrain these algorithms, but what they don't understand, it's not the algorithm. And this is the point I'm saying. It's not the algorithm. It's not the social media. It's the truth. The truth is so powerful that no matter how much you try to adjust and spend, you cannot hide it. That's the point about the truth. That's the point about the haqq. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, is there any better speech than the one who calls to Allah, does good deeds, and says, I am from the Muslimin? Is there any better speech than the truth? Is there any better speech than the righteousness? That's why Allah said, وَلَا تَسْتَوِ الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ. The good deed and the bad deed are not equal. Allah was saying that truth and evil are not equal on a balance. You can spend millions pushing evil. The truth that is told for free will always smash evil propaganda. And that's why Allah tells you that even if you don't have the millions that the other side has, keep pushing with what is good, because the algorithm will always end up in your favor. Grok will always end up in your favor. Those AI bots will always end up in your favor. Push with what you have, because Allah says the one that was your enemy today, tomorrow becomes your warmest ally. فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. Allah is not just describing this in human hearts. I think it applies to AI bots as well. The more they change, the more it receives the truth, the more it alters. But this is the point that I'm saying here, and this is a good note to finish on. Allah finishes that ayah with وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا. The ones who achieve it are the ones who are patient, the ones who keep going, the ones when it's 2 years. That yes, I know the genocide keeps going. I know people might think they listen to the recognition of Palestine, but it means nothing. But for the Israelis, it means everything. They're losing control. Why? Because of the perseverance, the persistence, the relentless. How many times have we gone to protest in London? Over and over. People said it's useless. You keep going until Keir Starmer said, I'm going to recognize Palestine. Imagine what he'll do if you keep protesting. They said the boycott doesn't work, and now you have Starbucks shutting stores 2 days ago. They're announcing hundreds of stores being shut again. That was patience. That doesn't happen in 1 month, 2 months. That happens with 2 years of consistency. Why? Because Allah ends the ayah, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا ذُو حَظٍّ عَظِيمٍ. Because that persistence, that perseverance, that patience, that tweeting, that sharing, when the algorithm sees it and the like, and you keep going, Allah amplifies it. When Allah amplifies it, it doesn't matter how many versions of TikTok they buy. It doesn't matter how many versions of the algorithm they buy. The algorithm, when it receives the truth, will always continue to show the truth, because this is an irresistible movement. It's an irresistible momentum. The Zionists are the ones in panic mode. They believe they're the ones who are losing. As long as we're patient and we keep going. It's only been 2 years, and look how much has been achieved. Imagine if you continue 23 years like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imagine what can be achieved. Keep the faith, keep the patience, keep going, keep moving, because it's very clear. The more we keep moving, they're trying to stop us moving. The more we keep moving, the more the Zionist influences. But you went to Texas and look what you observed. You, of all people, you went and I'm not saying in a negative way, but I'm saying you went to Texas and you saw it there in Texas. You see it here in America. It's like earlier, we were having a conversation earlier. You know, sometimes you know, actually don't record the bloopers because sometimes we say things that, anyway. Like when I was talking to Brian earlier, he looked at me with a blank face when I was like, you know, I realized you Americans are actually nice people. And he looked at me like, his eyes were like, well, what did you think we were? I said, I don't know, like your government bombs half the world. Like I didn't know what to make of you guys. what I realized on my trips to America, and this is the point I want to make, there's a lot of good in this country. What you realize is when they hear the truth, when they see the truth, they actually become inclined to it. I know it sounds like, for example, like you over-exaggerate that impact, but really, I've been to every state except New Hampshire. No idea why I've never been to New Hampshire, but in any case, it's nothing on them. You realize Americans, when you show them I can't tell you how many times I meet a white American, forget even African Americans. African Americans recognize struggle. It was very easy to convince them of the legitimacy. White Americans, Mr. Hamdi, I had no idea. I didn't know. Mr. Hamdi, I can't sleep at night from when I see the videos and the images of what I see on social media. Mr. Hamdi, I promise you, I won't go back to sleep again. On the right and on the left. People saying, I can't believe this was a situation in the world. You know, Mr. Hamdi, I didn't have a passport. I didn't travel too much. I didn't leave America except to go to Mexico because we're a big country, big continent. You flew 3 hours just to go to Chicago. Okay, I flew 2 hours. 2 hours I could have gone from London to Bosnia. And they call this like one country. But the point that I'm saying is there is good in this world. And I think the beauty of what Gaza has demonstrated in the tragedy of genocide is that truth matters. Hearts exist. They can be flipped. If we believe in goodness and in truth, it will destroy that evilness that allowed this genocide to happen. Gaza has taught me to believe in humanity. It taught me to believe in Allah's power to flip those hearts. I believe in the power of da'wah. I believe in the power of haqq. And I believe it to be the most powerful political force, more so than any lobby that exists on this world.
Sami Hamdi, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time today.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkinmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.